And hello, fabulous AP students. This is your favorite teacher, Mr. Jacobson. I am excited to be with you today. Well, today we have started Unit 6 of the AP curriculum in APUSH here, and we're going to begin with the westward expansion. So much to talk about, and so many changes and effects that come out of the westward expansion. So let's begin. All right, so one thing that really helps with westward expansion is the Transcontinental Railroads. So you have this idea, right? Let's connect the America from sea to shining sea. So you have the Union Pacific that starts around Omaha, and they're going to start building from Omaha across the Great Plains, right? And then you got the Central Pacific that's going to start in Sacramento, and they're going to start building from Sacramento going across the Rockies, which was it was a shorter distance. However, getting across the Rockies was by far the most challenging of any of the tasks for the people who were building from Omaha westward. So a lot of Chinese helped with the laying of the foundations of the track and the blasting of the tunnels in the Sierra Nevada mountains. It was very dangerous. Many people lost their lives. However, the two tracks are going to meet in Utah, and that's going to be Promontory Point, and it's at that point where they put a gold spike in to sort of commemorate. Here's a picture of the two tracks coming together, and you have one train here for the Union Pacific, the other side for the Central, and anyway, so that's this is going to change America because now we've connected each. There's no west anymore per se because now we have trains that can get to either places. So you're going to get other additional routes happening. Some of the routes are going to be up in the northern part, like the Northern Pacific route here. You're going to have the Great Northern that's going to be finished starting from going to Seattle from St. Paul, Minnesota. You're going to have other routes that are going to continue. You got the South Pacific route from New Orleans to Los Angeles. You're going to have a lot because these train routes are coming. It's going to make it easier for miners and ranchers and business owners and everyone to start finding more opportunity within the Great Plains and the West, etc. Now, some of the negative effects that's going to happen. You have a lot of businesses that start, but they're also going to fail. You're going to have that massive gold rush happening, right? That gold rush for the West and just rush for the West, but even gold rush, it's going to have some environmental effects on the Indians. However, even before the Americans were going west, the Native American Indians were already hunting the buffalo at a rate that they never had done before prior to the Columbian Exchange. When the Spanish introduced the horse to them, the horse allowed them to continue to hunt the buffalo at a rate never done before, and it's going to make the buffalo nearly extinct. And then you're going to just see some population and cultural declines happen in Indian populations as a result. So we're going to see a lot of settlement happening in the West, especially like the Great Plains region, but it's also known as the Great American Desert, right? So if you look here in the dark, I don't know, dark, but just the more prominent green, if you will, section, you're gonna see that's the area it's very deserty. They call it the high plains, right? So there's not a whole lot going on. It's pretty flat for the most part. Um, it can be cold, but in the wintertime, but it can be really hot in the summertime. So it's not it's it's tough. It's tough to live out there. It's tough to survive. But we're gonna see more and more people with trains and things like that who are gonna be able to keep in mind that the Pacific coast is gonna get settled, the Rocky Mountains are gonna get settled, the lowlands will get settled. This is like the last place where Americans are going to settle, if you will. Um, Oklahoma being one of the last of any of the territories where people will try to find any kind of opportunity. So you got the mining frontier happening. There are things that came about because of all this new technology, and you got trains coming and railroads being built, and you got prospectors coming and people building up shops to sell shovels because people will buy those shovels because they want washing pans and all these things. People are going to start making opportunity for them out in the West due to gold rushes and other phenomena that are happening, and you're going to start seeing towns start popping up. I mean, Denver itself is a town that Denver, Colorado begins because of a gold rush slash silver rush, things like that. So in the same year, the discovery of Comstock lode, it's going to produce more than 340 million in gold and silver by 1890. Now this will let Nevada enter the union because the America's like, yeah, we should bring Nevada in because there's a lot of money that's bringing into Nevada, and why don't we get some tax off that? So you're going to get places like Montana, Idaho, and they're going to start receiving statehood because of the mining boom. So a lot of these states that normally wouldn't be admitted because there's now natural resources that kind of make them more attractive, now they are being admitted into the country much faster than say like Arizona or something, right? So we're starting to see these boom towns happen. They're called boom towns because they just spring up in a matter of years, and then they fall off just as fast. If the natural resources go away, like gold and silver. Nevada's Virginia City. Um, they started adding like theaters and churches and newspapers and schools and libraries and railroads and police. Mark Twain was even had a career in Virginia City working at a newspaper, and a few towns that served the mines such as San Francisco, Sacramento, Denver became prosperous cities even today. So you also have cattle frontier happening. So, after the Civil War, things started changing and people started looking towards the West for economic opportunity. So, in Texas, it became a prime state for raising cattle, especially the Texas Longhorn cattle, which were borrowed from the Mexicans. Um, Texas cattle business was going to get into was easy to get into because you have lots of cattle and you have a lot of grass and flat land that they can eat, so it wasn't too hard to feed them. Uh, town Cow towns sprang up along the railroads in places like Dodge City, Kansas, to accommodate the millions of cattle transported. Now you got cowboys who are also coming into play because of all these heavy ranchers. A lot of the cowboys would end up being like African American or Mexicans who would work for about $1 a day. In 1880, you got long cattle drives beginning to decline due to overgrazing and the drought of 1885 to 86, killing off 90% of the cattle. However, homesteaders are also going to cause the decline because they're going to use barbed wire. And barbed wire is going to cut off all this grazing going on by cattle. Barbed wire is going to keep them away because it's painful. It's not just a rope; it's a painful wire that punishes the person trying to get by. Right. So wealthy ranchers are going to use scientific ranching techniques like raising new breed of cattle with more tender meats by feeding them hay or grain. You're going to see the Wild West is going to become more tame. Americans will start eating more beef and pork. Cowboy image will forever be legendary. All right, so now we got the Homestead Act of 1862 happening. So this act is going to encourage people to go settle on the Great Plains. We're going to give you 160 acres. If you stay there for 5 years, you settle it, you work it, it's yours. So people see opportunities. So you got 500,000 families who are going to try and take advantage of it. And then you're going to see a lot of A lot of them fail, but some will succeed. And anyway, and a lot of that land is also going to get bought up by railroad companies and speculators trying to take advantage of the situation. Now, we got some problems and solutions happening. The Great Plains were dry and treeless. You got extreme heat and extreme cold, as I mentioned earlier in this. Water and wood was scarce for fencing. Farming was difficult with long spells of severe weather. Fall crop prices and cost of expensive machinery caused two-thirds of farmers to fail by 1900. We'll talk more about that in the future of this webcast. And western Kansas only lost half its population between 1888 to 1892 only. Anyway, so solutions happening. You have Joseph Glyden. He's going to be inventor of barbed wire. Remember, like wood is hard to find in the West, especially in the American desert, right? So barbed wire is a really easy thing, a lot lighter to transport than it would be, lumber. So you have this barbed wire being more preferable than lumber because it still does the same thing and it's just easier, lighter, and doesn't really. I mean, it's made of metal, so it's going to stay around longer environmentally. You got dry farming and deep plow techniques, which are going to be used because of the low moisture in the area. Um, you're gonna see they're gonna plant strains of Russian wheat because it can withstand cold weather, and you're gonna see a lot of government's gonna come in and change things because they're gonna put in dams and irrigation systems that's gonna save the Western farmer and and um, and continue on. So changes in agriculture are going to occur. Uh, you don't have subsistence farming happening anymore. That's when you farm to live. People are going to start farming to make a living. So they're going to start looking at cash crops like corn and wheat. And eventually, corn and wheat's not going to do it. And they're going to need to go, especially like in the Great Plains area. They got to go things where they're low moisture. So they're going to go after things like grapes, and things that can. You ever heard the grapes of wrath in Oklahoma? I think it was Oklahoma. Anyway, so they're going to plant other things as well that's going to make it a lot more easier due to the climate that's happening. Um, you have lots of like farmers trying to buy more expensive machines, right? They're trying to modernize with steam engines and seeders and reaper thrashers. Um, and you're going to see, global increase in production for wheat and corn and just all around the world. Wheat and corn is just going to become easily more accessible. What's that going to do? It just makes it more of a supply, which is going to drive down the prices of wheat and corn, and that's going to lead to deflation. And that's going to cause prices to drop, which is going to make it harder for farmers to support their families because they're also doing the same thing, but the prices have now dropped because it's just more abundant. So this is going to lead to more debt, more foreclosures by banks, and I mean the farmers really have a hard time. They might even have to rely on sharecropping, which we already learned doesn't work so well in after Reconstruction. So why would it work later, right? So you have some interesting things happening. So farmers felt victimized by all these impersonal forces. You have industrial corporations that were able to keep prices high on manufactured goods for forming monopolistic trusts. So the farmers are feeling like these tiny little people that keep getting, spat at, and there's all these bigger corporations of things that are manipulating things. Wholesalers and retailers, like they were called middlemen, they're going to take their cut before farmers get to sell anything. You have railroads, warehouses, elevators that took all their little profit along the way, which is just making it harder and harder for the average farmer to succeed. And then you have railroads who often charge more for short hauls instead of for a long haul because you're taking up more space on my train and I'm not even, and and so they felt like they could just charge them more as a result. So you have all these things happening. Taxes seem unfair. I mean, the farmers really feel like everything is going against them here. You have tariffs protecting various American industries, but not the farming industry. So the farmers are really feeling spat at here. So now we have farmers who are going to start fighting back. So we have the National Grange Movement, or the Grangers, right? So this is going to be formed and taking a role in economics and politics to defend members from the middlemen, trusts, and railroad companies. For example, Grangers established cooperatives, businesses owned and run by farmers to save to cost char to save the to save on the cost of charges by the middlemen. Now, in some states, Granger successfully got legislation passed. Other Granger laws made it illegal for railroads to fix prices by means of pools and to give rebates to privileged customers. You even have the landmark case of Munn versus Illinois, and the Supreme Court upheld the right of a state to regulate businesses of a public nature, such as the railroads. You also have farmer alliances happening. These are groups of farmers coming together, and they're going to actually get more political in their action, not to mention economic. And so we're going to see alliance movements are going to have a serious potential on creating a political party. This is pretty significant, especially as you're starting to see more of like a third party emerge, like a populist party, which is going to have some impact on future elections. So you had the Ocala Platform, and this is an organization of farmers that got together right here in Florida, and where the red is, and there you can kind of see where they're like, look, everything's against us, and especially they're really not liking these Wall Street bankers and big business people. So they started creating the Ocala platform, and this is what they called for: direct elections of U.S. senators. So remember, when the Constitution was made, it was the state legislature that elected the senators. Now they're looking to elect senators directly. You have lower tariff rates. You have a graduated income tax, meaning that richer people will pay more than poorer people, percentage wise, and a new banking system regulated by the federal government. In addition, farmers demanded that treasury notes and silver by used to increase the amount in circulation, because farmers wanted to increase the supply of money in order to create inflation, thereby raising crop prices. Many Granger ideas helped form the populist movement, shaking the foundation of the two-party system. So you have the closing of the frontier happening. There is am I getting a little ahead of myself? Maybe. But anyway, so by 1890, the Census Bureau is going to declare that that's it. The entire frontier, except for a few pockets, is now settled, right? So Oklahoma is kind of the last place to go, and this is going to lead to Frederick Jackson Turner, who is going to write a very influential book called "The Significance of the Frontier in American History." And here it is over here. And in his book, he's going to describe things like, frontier is an evolutionary process. It went from untamed wilderness to civilization. First, you have the hunters going in, and then next, you're going to get ranchers and miners and farmers, and then last, you're going to get these business people who are coming in to build up larger cities and towns. Turner argued that 300 years of frontier experience had shaped American culture, promoting independence, individualism, inventiveness, practical mindedness, and democracy. Historians have since challenged Turner's evolutionary views, citing that some towns were planned from the very beginning, like paper plot maps that were made for business and for political purposes. Now, the closing of the frontier really troubled Turner. He did not like this. He believed that the frontier was basically what made America America, because whenever a group of people were discontent with the American society, they just go west, right? For example, the Mormon pioneers, they kept getting chased out wherever they settled, and so they just said, "Forget it, we're gonna go to the Rocky Mountains," basically. And so, and that was fine because they were away and they were able to establish themselves somewhere else. So there are other groups of people in America that did that as well, that just kept going west if they weren't happy with the main body, if you will, of America. And now that the West is kind of closed off now, and the government's not really allowing any of that to happen, Turner was very concerned about that. He thought that the West always gave like a fresh start to people looking for opportunity. With the frontier closed, would America fall into patterns of Europe with wide class divisions and social conflict, he wondered. While many debate the Turner thesis, historians acknowledge that by 1890s, the largest movement of Americans was not from east to west, it was from rural communities to cities. Migrants saw more opportunity in industry than in agriculture. Not only was the era of the western frontier ending, but the dominance of rural America itself was in decline. So now you're gonna see some well, I shouldn't say see. So we'll just talk a little bit about the American Indians here, right? So you got the Hopi and the Sunni, and they're living like in the New Mexico, Arizona region. You have the Navajo and the Apache living in the Southwest, and they're kind of like hunters and gatherers slash some livestock, and they're very famous for their arts and crafts. In the Pacific Northwest, you got the Chinook. You also have the Shasta tribes, and they're living largely off like hunting and fishing. Many Indian tribes of the Great Plains, like the Sioux, the Blackfoot, the Cheyenne, um, etc. They gave up farming when the Spanish introduced the horse to them, and they just started hunting the buffalo to near extinction. Um, so here are many tribes that are happening, and they're gonna start seeing some changes come upon them due to the effects of all the settling, right? So one of the effects is going to be just there's going to be wars, there's going to be conflicts. You know, people are going to start encroaching on Indian territory, and they're not going to like that, the American Indians. So you're going to start seeing things like that happen, like in the Dakotas of the Black Hills. The Indian Appropriation Act ended the recognition of tribes as independent nations by the federal government and ended negotiations of treaty to be approved by Congress. So now you have a series of Sioux wars happening. The second war was famous for having Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse in the Northern Plains, and then there's that famous standoff with Colonel George Custer and the at the command of Little Bighorn in 1876. It was a combination of government compulsion and the buffalo's endangerment that's going to lead many of these Plains Indians to sort of have to change their way of life. You also have another form of resistance, which was known as ghost dance movement. So this is done by, so they're kind of tired of all these, Americans and white people taking over their land. And so they're going to have this ghost dance happening. It's going to lead to violence as well. And government's campaign to suppress the movement, famous Sioux medicine man Sitting Bull is going to be killed during his arrest. Then in December of 1890, the U.S. Army gunned down more than 200 American Indians in battle, um, and that included women and children. It, battle's a light word, right? It's more of a massacre of Wounded Knee in the Dakotas. This final tragedy marked the end of the Indian Wars on the blood crimson prairie. Now you got assimilation happening. So, what's going to happen to all these Native American Indians? Well, we got to start assimilating them into our culture, as we're kind of taking away their culture, if you will, or kind of ripping them away with all the changes and putting them on land saying you can have this land, and then later on, a few decades, come back saying, oh, we changed our mind. We didn't mean this land. We meant this little tiny pocket within, our territory here or whatever. So, you have Helen Hunt Jackson, and she writes a book known as The Century of Dishonor, and she's going to talk about how a lot of the a lot of the actions by the U.S. government is going to have a significant effect on these people. Um, it's going to be brought upon the American government to sort of try to fix it at least. So how do we help these people? So do we give them a formal education? Do we give them job training? Do we help them understand Christianity? As a result, yeah, boarding schools were built. You have you have Native American Indian children who are now being taught white culture, farming, industrial skills. So yeah, the Dawes Act. The Dawes Act was, well, anyway, it was designed to break up the tribal organizations, which many felt kept American Indians from becoming civilized and law-abiding citizens. So now we're going to sort of break up their whole, core of their culture, if you will. The Dawes Act divided the tribal lands into plots of up to 160 acres, depending on family size. So if you were a good citizen and you stayed on that land for 25 years, then you could basically get that land and adopt the habits of civilized life. Under the Dawes Act, the federal government distributed 47 million acres of the land to American Indians. However, 90 million acres of former land, often the best land, was sold over the years to white settlers, to by the government. You have speculators. You have American Indians themselves. So a lot of the good land is starting to get bought up here. Um, the new policy failed, and by the turn of the century, disease and poverty have reduced the American Indian population to just 200,000 people, with whom many lived as wards of the federal government. So we're gonna start seeing some changes happening. I'm sort of jumping ahead here, but if you go all the way to, the 1920s and 30s, there's going to be the Reorganization Act, which is going to promote the establishment of tribal organization and culture once again, and sort of celebrate their heritage. Since then, the number of people identifying as American Indians is going to increase. Today, more than 3 million American Indians belonging to 500 tribes will live in the U.S. And then you have the Santa Fe Trail. That trail is going to go from Missouri all the way from Missouri to New Mexico. It's nearly 1,000 miles, and that trail is going to start the a lot of commerce, along the way between Missouri and New Mexico. Eventually, there's going to be a railroad that's going to connect them as well. Mexican landowners in the Southwest and California, they were also guaranteed property rights and granted citizenship after the Mexican War. Mexican Americans moved throughout the West in search of work. Many found jobs working in sugar beet fields and mines, like in Colorado, for example. And then you have the conservation movement happening. So with all this settling and all this industry and change coming to the plains and to the West, you're going to get some deforestation. And that's going to be very concerning to people. So then now we're going to have calls for conservation movements where we need to protect them. So first they're going to say let's start protecting Yellowstone, and we're going to make it a national park, and it's going to be protected by the federal government. And then Yosemite, which is in California, that's going to become a state park, and then eventually it's going to become a federal park as well. And so you have all these ideas coming about where we need to protect our land and fight against the deforestation that naturally occurs with all this heavy settling that's coming, right? So, with the frontier closed, the Americans grew increasingly concerned about the loss of public lands and the natural treasure they contained. The Forest Reserve Act of 1891 and the Forest Management Act of 1897 withdrew federal timberlands from development and regulated their use. While most conservationist scientists believe in scientific management and regulated use of natural resources, preservationists, such as John Muir, a leading founder of the Sierra Club in 1892, went a step further and aimed to protect areas from human interference. So the establishment of Arbor Days in 1872, a day dedicated to planting trees and education efforts of the uh, Audubon Society and the Sierra Club, reflected a growing environmental awareness by 1900. So that's that. Go ahead and write that summary, and we'll discuss this when we return. Thanks, and bye-bye.